You know what I keep seeing everywhere? I see it in coffee shops at 10 a.m. on a Tuesday. I see it in the hiking trails on the weekends. I see it in the comments sections of videos just like this one. Men, specifically. Men in their 50s, 60s, and even 70s. But these aren't just any men. These are men who have spent decades inside the system of traditional relationships, who played by the rules, who checked every single box society put in front of them. And now they are walking away. And when I say walking away, I need you to understand the gravity of that phrase. I don't mean they are taking a break. I don't mean they are working on themselves so they can jump back into the dating market next summer. I mean they are done completely, permanently, without a shred of interest in reconsidering at first glance. Society, and perhaps you might look at these men and make a quick assumption. You'd think, oh, he must have been burned. Badly. You imagine a messy divorce, a lawyer who took everything, a cheating scandal, something dramatic and loud. You assume their solitude is a reaction to trauma, a wound that hasn't healed. But here's the fascinating part. When you actually sit down and talk to these men, when you stripped away the societal judgment and just listen, that is rarely the story. Most of them had relatively normal relationships. There were no flying plates, no police cars in the driveway, nothing you could point to and say, aha, that's the trauma response. So, what is really going on? If you ask them, the answer is always some version of the same haunting realization. They look you in the eye with a calmness that is almost unnerving, and they say, I gave everything, she gave nothing, and I am simply not doing the math that way ever again. When the world hears that, the immediate reaction is to label these men. They are called bitter. They are called incels in retirement. They are accused of exaggerating. But here is what I have noticed after analyzing hundreds of these stories. When these men explain what they mean, they are not being dramatic. They are being precise. They are being accountants of their own lives. They are describing an imbalance so massive, so systemic, and so prolonged that once they finally saw it clearly, they couldn't unsee it. That is what this video is about today. We are not here to complain. We are not here to bash women. We are here to do the math. We are going to perform a literal forensic accounting of what the modern man gives versus what he receives. If you are a man who has walked away and everyone around you thinks you've lost your mind, this video is your validation. If you're still in it, still grinding, but starting to feel that gnawing emptiness in your chest, this is your wake-up call, because we're about to discuss the one thing nobody wants to talk about, the return on investment of the modern relationship, and why, for millions of men, that investment has gone bankrupt. To understand why men leave in their 60s, we have to go back in time. We have to go back to when you were in your late 20s, 30s, or early 40s. Let's set the scene. You were building, you were grinding, maybe you were married, maybe you were trying to find a wife, you were doing exactly what you were told a good man does, you were establishing your career, you were working late to secure a mortgage, you were becoming the provider, the protector, the stable rock. And did you remember how women in their 20s treated you back then? They didn't see you. Not really. You were invisible. You were the nice guy, you were the friend, you were the shoulder to cry on when the bad boy didn't call her back. You were sterile, yes. You had a decent job, oh, yes. You had emotional maturity, yes. But that is not what they were looking for. In the sexual marketplace of youth, stable is a synonym for boring. They wanted excitement. They wanted the edge. They wanted the chaos. They wanted the DJ with no job but great hair, or the guy who treated them with indifference. If you tried dating younger women back then, or even women your own age who were still chasing the thrill, the rejection was swift and polite. You're a great guy, but I need someone more spontaneous. We are in different life stages. The message was clear. You were not enough. Your value, as a builder and a protector, was not the currency they were trading in. So, what did you choose? What do you do? You accepted it. You humbled yourself. You dated women who settled for you. You built relationships based on the promise that if you just worked hard enough, if you just provided enough security, eventually you would be appreciated. Here is the crucial insight. Back then, you weren't invisible because you lacked value. You were invisible because your value wasn't sexy yet. The stability, the maturity, the ability to actually sustain a life, those are long-term assets. And the market was obsessed with short-term thrills. You remember that feeling, don't you? Watching women you would have treated like queens choose men who treated them like options. You watched them choose chaos over stability, drama over peace, and you swallowed that pill. You thought, fine, that's how it goes, maybe later. Well, guess what later has arrived? Fast forward 20 years. You are in your 50s or 60s. You have the grey hair. Maybe you aren't as fast on the treadmill, but you have the assets. You have the pension, the paid off house, the emotional stoicism, the wisdom. And suddenly, oh, the script flips. Suddenly, women who wouldn't have given you a second look in 1995 are sliding into your DMs in 25. Women your age who are divorced, women then up to 15 years younger who are tired of the games, and your first thought might be flattering. Finally, you think, finally they see me. But then, the second thought hits you, the darker thought, wait, I'm older, I'm physically past my prime, I'm less energetic. Why now? The answer is the most uncomfortable truth in dating. Nothing about you changed. What changed is what she needs. Back then, she needed excitement. Now, she needs a bailout. Back then, you weren't useful to her entertainment. Now, you are essential to her survival. She needs the security, she needs the retirement fund. She needs the emotional rock because she is tired of the chaos she chased for 2 decades. And here is the thing that nobody wants to say out loud, but every man feels in his gut. Being wanted because you are finally useful doesn't feel like being wanted at all. It feels like being a utility. It feels like being a resource. It feels like you have gone from not good enough to pay the bills. That realization that you were invisible when she had options, and you're only visible now that her options have narrowed, is the first crack in the foundation. It is the moment the resentment starts to brew. Not because you are bitter, but because you realize you are being hired for a job, not loved for a man. Once that crack opens, men start doing something dangerous. They start doing the math. Let's talk about relationships like investments. Because, stripped of the poetry and the romance novels, that is essentially what they are. A partnership is an exchange. You put resources in time, money, energy, emotional labor, biological viability, and you expect a return: companionship, loyalty, peace, family, legacy. Here is the math most men don't do until it's too late. Let's calculate the actual return on investment ROI for the average good provider husband. Let's look at the financial input first. You worked 40 to 50, sometimes 60 hours a week. You did this for 30 years. Let's say, conservatively, you averaged $60,000 a year over that span. In gross income, that is 1.8 million. Now, ask yourself how much of that 1.8 million went to you. How much of it was spent on your hobbies, your dreams, your preferences? For most married men, the answer is negligible. The vast majority, let's be conservative and say 70%, went to funding the family lifestyle. That's 0.26 million of your life energy converted into a house she wanted. Cars that were safe for the kids, vacations she planned, furniture she picked out. Now, what was the financial contribution from the other side? Maybe she worked, maybe she didn't, but even in households where the wife works, studies consistently show that her income is often treated as discretionary or supplemental. While the husband's income is for obligations, your money pays the mortgage, her money pays for the extras. So, purely financially, the ROI is often negative. You invested 1.26 million. She invested a fraction of that. But money is the easy part. Money is just paper. Let's talk about the real currency: emotional labor. Society loves to talk about the emotional labor of women, but let's look at the emotional labor of the stoic husband. You managed her emotions daily. When she came home upset from work, you listened, you de-escalated. You were the punching bag for her stress. When she was anxious, you were the rock. You absorbed her chaos so the household could function. Let's estimate you spent just 20 minutes a day managing her moods, validating her feelings, and de-escalating conflicts you didn't create. Over 30 years, that is 650 hours. That is nearly 2 full years of full-time work just managing her psychology. Now, the reverse: when you were stressed, when you were terrified about losing your job, when you were grieving. How often was she the rock? How often did she absorb your pain without making it about her? For most men, the ratio is brutal. You gave 3,000 hours of support your year. You received maybe 300. You were expected to be stoic. Your vulnerability was seen as weakness. Her vulnerability was seen as a demand for service. And finally, let's look at life decisions. Where did you live? Did you live there because it was close to your job or close to her mother? Where did you go on vacation? Was it the fishing trip you wanted, or the resort she saw on Instagram? How was the house decorated? Who were your friends? Count them up. Be honest. In 30 years of partnership, what was the ratio of decisions made to accommodate her versus you? For most men I speak to, it's an 80-20 split. 80% of the life you built was built to her specifications. You were just the contractor, she was the architect. In the business world, if you had a partner who contributed 20% of the capital but demanded 80% of the voting rights and took 90% of the dividends, you wouldn't just dissolve the partnership, you would sue them for fraud. Yet men do this for decades. Why? Because we are told that this is what love is. We are told that happy life is a virtue, not a hostage negotiation tactic. But eventually, the math becomes undeniable. You realize you haven't been building a life with someone, you have been subsidizing a life for someone. I want to tell you about a man named Robert. This is a true story, and it is the perfect illustration of what we are talking about. Robert is 57 years old, he spent 32 years married, he was the classic good man, church on Sundays, coached Little League, never missed a mortgage payment, faithful for 3 decades. About 6 months after his divorce was finalized, we were having coffee. He looked different, lighter, younger. Actually, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a piece of paper. It was folded into a tiny square, worn at the edges like he had been carrying it around every single day. He unfolded it on the table and smoothed it out. It was a simple T-chart, 2 columns. The header on the left said what I brought. The header on the right said what she brought. The left side, his side, was single-spaced. It went all the way to the bottom of the page. It listed things like primary income, 90% of household revenue, home maintenance and repairs weekends spent fixing, not resting, crisis management handling the death of parents, financial scares, emotional stability never yelling, always calming, fatherhood active presence, social buffer dealing with difficult neighbours or family, tuition payments, retirement planning. It was a wall of text, a testament to a life of service. Then, looked at the right column, her column. It had 3 items. I looked at Robert. I said, "Bob, come on, you're being bitter. There's no way. She must have brought more than 3 things to the table in 32 years. Robert shook his head. He was dead serious. He said, "Dad, I really tried to be fair. I sat with this paper for a week. I tried to list everything she actually did that added value to the partnership, distinct from just being there or consuming resources." The 3 items were: 1. She cooked dinner most weeknights though he paid for the groceries. 2. She decorated the house and kept it looking presentable. 3. She organized the social calendar for holidays. That was it. That was the summary of 32 years from her end. Meals, decor, and social coordination. Everything else, the safety, the future, the roof, the peace, the heavy lifting was him. Robert told me he stared at that list for 20 minutes the night he wrote it. And for the first time in his life, he cried, not out of sadness for losing her, but out of grief for himself. He realized he had been in a one-person partnership for 3 decades. He realized that what she brought to the table was simply her presence, and somehow society had convinced him that her mere presence was of equal value to his blood, sweat, and tears. This is the Robert Protocol. I encourage every man watching this to do it. Take a piece of paper, be honest, write down what you provide, write down what you receive, but be careful, because once you see it written down in black and white, you cannot unsee it. What Robert realized, and what millions of men are realizing, is that the modern relationship deal is often structured like a bad employment contract. She didn't handle stress, she created it and then expected him to manage it. She didn't provide emotional support, she consumed his. She didn't compromise, she expected accommodation. She didn't protect the relationship, she checked out whenever it was difficult. And the brutal part, she probably genuinely believed she was giving just as much as he was. Why? Because in her mind, allowing him to be with her was the gift. Her existence was the contribution. And for a man in his 50s who has finally woken up, that is an insult he can no longer swallow. But why now? Why do men tolerate this for 20 years and then suddenly, at 55 or 60, pull the plug? Is it a midlife crisis? Is it boredom? No, it is biology. It is neurochemistry. Here is something most people do not understand about male psychology. Men have a biological threshold for one-sided relationships. It is not cultural, it is hardwired. When you are in your 20s and 30s, you are swimming in testosterone. Testosterone is a powerful drug. It doesn't just drive sex drive or muscle growth, it drives tolerance for BS. High testosterone makes men more willing to pursue, it makes you willing to compete, it makes you willing to accept unfavorable terms in exchange for partnership and access to intimacy. Nature designed you this way. Nature wants you to reproduce, so it drugs you with hormones that make you blind to bad deals. You will put up with the drama, you will chase the girl who ignores you, you will tolerate the imbalance because, biologically, the drive to acquire a mate overrides the logic of the cost. But here is what happens as you age. Testosterone declines. It drops about 1% per year after age 30. By the time you're 60, your levels might be 30% to 40% lower than they were in your prime. Now, society tells you this is a bad thing. They try to sell you pills to fix it. But in this context, it is a superpower. When the testosterone fog lifts, your tolerance for one-sided relationships evaporates. You stop being willing to chase. You stop being willing to fight for her. Not because you are bitter, but because the chemical bribe that nature was paying you to put up with it has stopped coming in. The same relationship dynamic that was tolerable at 30 becomes intolerable at 55. Not because the relationship got worse, but because your brain literally recalibrated. You're seeing reality without the rose-colored glasses of reproductive hormones. Then, there is the second biological factor, cortisol. Cortisol is the stress hormone. Long-term relationships that require constant emotional management where you are walking on eggshells keep your cortisol chronically elevated. Chronic high cortisol is a killer. It destroys sleep quality. It increases inflammation. It shrinks the brain. It raises blood pressure. It literally shortens your lifespan. As men age, we become more sensitive to cortisol. We physically cannot handle the stress anymore. The argument that you could shake off at 35 will ruin your sleep for 3 days at 55. Your body starts sending you louder signals. It screams, "This environment is toxic. This stress is killing us. Get out." That feeling you have, that desperate need for peace, for quiet, for a room where nobody is demanding anything from you that is not you being antisocial. That is your survival instinct kicking in. That is your body trying to save your life. And finally, there is the prefrontal cortex. This is the part of your brain responsible for long-term planning, pattern recognition, and logic. Did you know it doesn't fully finish developing until your late 20s, and it continues to refine into your middle age, in your 30s? You're still biologically wired to be present-focused. You think, if I just work harder, it will get better. By your 50s, your pattern recognition is elite. You have 30 years of data points. You look back at the relationship and your brain says, based on the historical data of the last 3 decades, the probability of her changing is 0%. The probability of this getting worse is 100%. Therefore, the only logical move is to exit. This is why older men seem so cold when they finally leave. It's because it's not an emotional tantrum. It is a calculated, rational decision made by a fully developed brain that has finally decided to prioritize survival over sacrifice. For almost every man who walks away, there is a specific moment, a singular point in time where the denial breaks. For some, it is the driveway moment. I know a guy, David. He told me that for the last 2 years of his marriage, he would get home from work at 6:30 p.m. He would pull into the driveway, turn off the engine, and he would just sit there, sometimes for 10 minutes, sometimes for 45. One day, his neighbor was walking the dog and tapped on the glass. "You okay, Dave?" "You've been sitting there a while." Dave rolled down the window and said, "Yeah, just enjoying the quiet." And as he said it, the truth hit him like a sledgehammer. He realized he was enjoying the silence of a cold metal box more than the prospect of walking into his own home. He realized that his car, a confined space, was his sanctuary, and his home, the 3,000 square foot house he paid for, was enemy territory. It was the place where the job didn't end, it just changed managers. Once you realize you dread walking through your own front door, you cannot unknow it. That is the point of no return. For other men, it is the crisis moment. You lose your job, a parent dies, you have a health scare, something real happens. You are vulnerable, you need support. And instead of showing up for you, she is annoyed. She is annoyed that your grief is disrupting her schedule. She is frustrated that your job loss might impact the vacation plans. You are burying your father, and she's complaining that you aren't emotionally available for her minor problems. That is the moment the illusion shatters. You realize she is not my partner, she is my dependent. Partners show up in a storm. Dependents complain about the rain. I spoke to a man, 92 years old, who told me his moment was much quieter. He was at a restaurant with his wife. They were eating in silence, as usual. He looked over at a nearby table. There was a couple, about the same age. They were talking, really talking, laughing, touching hands. They seemed genuinely happy to be in each other's presence. He looked at them, then he looked at his wife, who was scrolling on her phone. He felt nothing, no anger, no hate, just a vast, empty nothingness. He thought, I don't have that. I've never had that. And if I stay, I will never have that. He realized that staying wasn't noble. It was a self-inflicted sentence to a loveless existence. Whatever your moment was dramatic or quiet, it changed everything. Because that moment wasn't the end of the relationship. That moment was the end of your denial. And denial was the only load-bearing wall keeping the house standing. Now, let's look at the landscape you're walking away from. If you decide to enter the dating market today as a man in his 50s or 60s, what is the deal on the table? Women in this demographic have a list of demands, a very specific list. Financial security. They don't want a partner to build with, they want a finished product. They expect the house, the travel, the debt-free life. They want access to the wealth you spent 30 years accumulating. Emotional stability. They want you to be the rock. No baggage, no trauma. You must be completely healed and ready to handle their baggage. Flexibility. They have their routines, their grandkids, their hobbies. You must fit into their life, but not disrupt it. That is the demand. Now, what is the offer? What are they bringing to you? Companionship, you can get that from a dog, and the dog won't judge you. Sex. Maybe, but strictly on her terms, and often used as a bargaining chip. Domestic support. In the modern era, suggesting a woman cook or clean is considered heresy, so you have a marketplace where the demands are sky-high, your resources, your stability and your freedom, and the suppliers rock bottom her presence. According to dating app analytics, women over 40 who filter for men 10 to 20 years older list financial stability as a requirement 73% of the time. But when asked what they bring financially, only 12% mention contributing assets, 73% want your money, 12% offer theirs. Older men are good at math. They have run businesses. They have managed portfolios. They look at this deal trading their hard-earned peace and freedom for a lopsided partnership and they say, the ROI is negative. I'm out. This isn't fear of commitment. This is fear of a bad investment. So here is what happens when you finally tell the world you are done. They will judge you. Your married friends will judge you because you are a mirror. Your freedom reflects their captivity. If you can be happy alone, it forces them to question why they are miserable together. They need you to be unhappy to validate their own choices. Your family will judge you because you are breaking the social script. Men are supposed to die in the harness. Men are supposed to sacrifice until their hearts stop. A man who unhooks himself from the plow is a threat to the village. Women will judge you because you are removing yourself from the supply chain. You are a resource that has gone off grid. They will call you selfish. They will call you damaged. Let them use whatever words they want, because their judgment is not your reality. What they call bitterness, you know, is clarity. What they call giving up, you know, is strategic withdrawal. What they call loneliness, you know, is peace. There is a profound transformation that happens about 18 months after you walk away. The neural pathways in your brain restructure. The addiction to validation fades. You wake up in a house that is quiet. You make coffee exactly how you like it. You spend your money on things that bring you joy. You go to bed when you're tired. You realize that you've reclaimed the most valuable asset of all autonomy. You're not incel. You're not MGW in a toxic sense. You are simply a man who has completed his shift. You put in your 30 years. You paid your dues. You built the civilization. And now you are retiring from the job of being a utility object. If you are listening to this, and you're on the fence, or you're already out and feeling the pressure to go back, don't trust your gut, trust the math, trust the silence. You gave everything once, the investment failed, you're not obligated to make that bad investment again. That isn't a tragedy, that is a victory, a hard-won, evidence-based, rational victory. Enjoy your peace, gentlemen, you earned it.